Star Wars 7x7, episode 2409. Today, the first of a two-part interview with Daniel José Older, author of, most recently, Star Wars The High Republic Adventures. Punch it. Hey Rebel Rouser, I'm Alan Voivod, and this is Star Wars 7x7, your daily dose of Star Wars joy. And thank you so much for joining me for it. So here's the official bio. Daniel José Older, a lead story architect on the Star Wars cross-platform initiative, The High Republic, is the New York Times best-selling author of the sci-fi adventure Flood City, the middle-grade historical fantasy series Dactyl Hill Squad, the Book of Lost Saints, the Bone Street Rumba urban fantasy series, Star Wars Last Shot, and the award-winning young adult series The Shadow Shaper Cipher, which won the International Latino Book Award and was shortlisted for the Kirkus Prize in Young Readers Literature, the Andre Norton Award, the Locust, the Mythopoeic Award, apologies on that if I pronounced that wrong, and named one of Esquire's 80 books every person should read and one of Time's best fantasy books of all time. He co-wrote the upcoming graphic novel Death's Day and writes the monthly IDW comic book series The High Republic Adventures. You can find more info and read about his decade-long career as a New York City paramedic at danieljoseolder.net. And he's also the author of a couple of short stories in the From a Certain Point of View collections for both Star Wars and The Empire Strikes Back. So there's that too. And we're going to kick off talking about that phrase that he uses at the beginning of his bio, lead story architect, because that's a new phrase. And so we'll dig into just exactly what that means. We're going to talk about his work on, obviously, the High Republic Adventures and the whole High Republic initiative as well. And yes, not in today's episode, but in part 2, you will definitely hear about buckets of blood. But there's a lot to talk about before we get there. And so, without further ado, here is the first half of my conversation with Daniel José Older, author of the IDW Star Wars The High Republic Adventures. Daniel José Older, thank you so much for joining me on Star Wars 7x7. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me. Looking forward to talking to you.
Oh, likewise. I'm very much looking forward to this, too. This is a long time coming as far as your involvement in this High Republic project, and now coming to fruition with the High Republic Adventures releasing earlier this week. How does it feel to just have it out into... Well, we're recording... in full disclosure, we're recording this before the release, so knowing that It's going to be out in the world, how are you anticipating that feeling to be?
I'm already enjoying it. It's already amazing. I can imagine how amazing it's going to be. No, seriously, it's really been such a thrill to, even in these past 2 weeks, just to witness the joy and excitement that so many people have had from the work that's already come out in the High Republic. And the work, the 2 books that came out are by Charles and Justina, and they're fantastic. And they're not by me, but as a team member, I really do share in the excitement around everything happening. And I've just been soaking it all in and enjoying it. And people are so invested so much already. And I just love it, in the excitement, because I share that excitement. Like, all the writers are invested too, so it's just amazing to feel the investment from other people. And even with the comic, which hasn't come out yet, there's people excited about those characters already, and that's the biggest thrill as a writer. I just really enjoy it, and it's just very pure.
Yeah, and you being a writer involved in it is one thing, but your bio actually describes you as a lead story architect on the platform.
Yes.
I'm wondering if you could share a little bit more about that conceptually. What does it mean to be a lead story architect?
Yeah, that's what we all are. All of us involved, on that level. And it really is that we're both dealing with our individual projects and looking sort of a bird's eye view on the whole of the story. From the world now knows about the different phases and all those different pieces and how they all come together, and really just it's the macro and the micro, and bringing them together to make something that makes sense and is very interconnected. And I think what's so cool about that is that's what I say this as a Star Wars fan. that's one of the greatest things about Star Wars, is that there's so much cool interconnectivity that when it's at its best, doesn't feel forced, but just forced, no pun intended.
Right.
But doesn't feel, but feels like a very natural part of the world, because the world is very interconnected, right? And it's so cool when like you're reading a comic and you're like, oh, they're talking about that dude from like Rogue One. You know what I mean? Like, it's so, there's minutia, but it matters, and it doesn't, again, doesn't feel like shoved in our face. And that's cool in a way that like almost time travels, right? Because there's like things that happened literally 30 years ago that we're pulling from. On the other hand, it's in a different kind of cool when it's happening simultaneously, right? So we are literally on the phone with each other and on Slack with each other, like making sure our stories interconnect in really, interesting and thoughtful ways and strategic ways, because we are telling a large story as much as we're telling small stories. And I think what really works about this initiative is that the stories work on their own. You don't need any of the other books to make one of the books work. But if you do read all the books, you get a whole other level to the meta story.
Yeah, and you have just hit on in little ways, I think, about every single question that I have for you.
My bad. I'm sorry.
No, that's in a good way, because now I'm sitting here going, oh, gee whiz, where do I begin with you?
Right.
Actually, you know what? Well, let's do this. I will say my experience of your writing is limited to your Star Wars work, and you've obviously done a lot of other things outside of Star Wars. I will say my experience of you is not as a linear writer, in the sense that, for example, Last Shot is not told as a linear story, and even your short story Stetfer, from a certain point of view, has that meta layer of the editorial written on it. So as approaching Star Wars The High Republic Adventures, is that sort of the way that you like to approach your storytelling, and does the High Republic Adventures, allow you to explore that, or do you have to do it a different way? And I'll stop adding categorizations and let you roll with that.
That's such a super interesting question. One caveat is with Last Shot, that was sort of the nature of that novel from its inception, was that it had to span the Han we know and the Han we were about to meet in Solo, right? So it just really required different time moments. On the other hand, nobody said, like, Daniel, you need to add a whole other time period with the bad guy and his origin story. And so I ended up, and then like have L3 get really like Galaxy Brain at the end, do all this other crazy. So that was kind of me. But it was really challenging to make that novel work with literally like 5 different time periods kind of like intertwining. That was a challenge that was, I don't know if I would have picked it, but I'm glad that I had it, and I did my best. But it does speak to, I do love when like there's the story is almost in conversation with its own format, and I think you picked up on that in Stet. It's also true in a weird way with my story in the original Fact Pov with Sardis Ramson. It's called Born in the Storm, and he's really filling out an incident report, right? And the story is kind of bucking against its own borders, as it has to in a way, because it's like the incident report wants everything to be in a neat little box, right? And the story itself in Sardis is his entire arc in that little moment of his life that we're glimpsing is busting out of his literal uniform, riding off naked into the twin sunset on a dewback. And so it's really like it's the story again, like in tension with its format. And I just think that's like so interesting and a really fun approach to things, is to kind of play with format. And the challenge there, of course, is like not to allow it to just become quirky and like, oh, this clever little thing, right? But actually to make it worthwhile. It's the same problem that like a monster movie has, right? If a monster movie is just about the monster, it's boring. But if it's a good story that also has a monster in it, that's Star Wars, right? And that's there it is. Like, but to answer your question about IDW, I love that question, because it's often been kind of those moments, not so much with time, but just with like, what is my entrance point to a particular issue? And with a couple issues already, it's really been realizing like, okay, this story is about how these two characters are in contrast to each other, right? So issue 1, and we see this even in the first 3 pages, but the whole issue really, it's called Collision Course, and it's about 2 very different people in very different worlds of the galaxy who are on a collision course to crash into each other, while there is a literal disaster on a collision course with the planet that one of them lives on, right?
Right.
But once I realized that like we're telling Zine's story and we're telling Lula's story, and they're coming from opposite places, but they're ending up in the physical same place, and and whatever else that may mean, that's when the issue snapped into place. Because I knew the story was about Padawan showing up on a planet to help them out in a disaster, and the Nile showing up too. But that could be so many different things, and it really was being like, here's the two different points of view I'm telling the story from, that made it all, again, like made it click. And that's when it was like, okay, if we're doing that, then I wanted to have these two pages 2 and 3, facing each other to really set up that dynamic from jump. That okay, we're this is the story we're telling, and here's how then throughout the issue they get closer and closer together until bang, that moment that really climaxes the whole story.
Now, this, to me, it sounds like you are also very well served by the fact that as I understand some of your other writing that I've just, explored at the top level, you don't just write prose, you also, write other elements for things like with Flood City. There are posters and textbook pages and all these other things, but you've never written technically for comics before, though. Is that correct?
Right.
And
That's
yet
true.
you are deeply versed in the world of comics from just your own childhood. So
yes.
Does that all then get thrown into the mix as you consider how to deliver a story like this?
Yes, totally. That plus just tons of reading about them. I mean, okay, tons of reading comics, literally, yes, from childhood on, and wanting to actually, if I'm really being honest, one of my first dream jobs was to be a comic artist and creator. And one of the first projects I ever did at the ripe old age of, I think, 10 or 11 was to try to do a graphic novel version of the Iliad.
Wow!
As one does.
As one
right?
does!
I was that big a nerd. I was a huge nerd.
Wow.
I either wanted to be a comic book artist or a political cartoonist, or probably both. But I was obsessed with both of those mediums, So I've always been creating. I've always been storytelling, and even at a very young age, I was creating comics. But this is my first actual real comic. So it's like that lifelong love of it. It's really studying the medium in books and reading different writers about their process. Scott McCloud, of course, Bendis has a great book about it. And then talking to, I have a lot of friends who write comics, and so really picking their brain about it, and especially not limited to, but also just other prose writers who've moved over to comics, which is an interesting move. And so, yeah, it's really been the past couple of years of just really researching and getting deep with it.
So when you went to Skywalker Ranch and knew that this was being developed, did you know that comics were going to be part of the whole initiative? And did you walk in there thinking to yourself, I hope I get to work on the comic side of things? Or
yes.
Oh, you did? Yeah.
No, that was it. That was it. I think I told Mike. I was like, I know I'm a prose writer and I'm known for that, but comics is really where it's at for me right now, and that's what I want to do. And he was like, what about a middle grade and a comic? And I was like, bet, sign me up. So here we are.
That's terrific. And I was just watching the Disney Insider episode that featured the High Republic, and
yes,
your particular
so cool,
bit.
Right?
Oh, it was wonderful. Oh, and just to see the expression on your face and everybody else's face walking into the room where you get to see all of the concept art. Oh my gosh.
Something that I know you have a question, but let me just say quick. Something that comic writers I think don't realize about the joy of going from prose to comics is that prose writers will go their whole career and very often get cover art and maybe some fan art of their work, tops. You know what I mean? A very successful and lucky and blessed prose writer will get lots of fan art, and that's amazing. But for the most part, art is a rarity for us. So to suddenly just get our inboxes deluged with amazing artwork, and Harvey Tolibao is an amazing artist. It just feels like Christmas every day of the week. It's such an incredible feeling, particularly coming from the dearth of art that is prose writing. It can't be stressed enough. But go ahead.
Oh, actually, I'm going to pivot because you mentioned Harvey, and I watched the launch event for the High Republic, and I think the moment that jumped out at me most out of everything was just one small moment with you where you mentioned that Harvey's artwork taught you things about Lula
Yes.
that you did not, that you didn't know yourself, and everything you said so far about just wanting to be an artist when you were younger and your appreciation for that really speaks to that particular quote as well and informs that. So I would love for you to talk a little bit about Harvey's work and about what you learned more specifically about Lula and any of the other characters from his work.
Yeah, and it's hard because it's the type of stuff that the reason I had to learn it from the art is because it is the very type of thing that's really hard to put into words, right? And that's what art is so great for, is that like I can't write, a sentence that describes certain just energies about a person or the way they carry themselves, or I probably could, but it would be really, really hard, and it would probably sound really forced, and like I was trying to like prove to you something, right? But with a couple pen strokes, like Harvey can get across. Or in Harvey's case, like very meticulous and very, amazing line work. Harvey can get across things that are just like the subtleties of a character. So it's really hard to put into words exactly what it is that I took from it. But I just know I have very concrete memories of like looking at his art and being like, yes, like this moment, it's like things in like, I wrote her to be afraid, but her face looks determined, and it's kind of the cross section of like crossroads of like being determined and being afraid, and like and she's talking very literally in the prose about putting on a mask and like not looking afraid even though she is terrified, and kind of like the way he grasped that and then brought it to life is just incredible to me. And then a character like Crix, who is very complicated in the way I wrote him, but I feel like even more complicated in the way he's drawn on some levels, or complicated may be the wrong word, but there's new levels because of how he's drawn, and just like the stress that's embedded in that character that Harvey really gets across perfectly. There's one particular panel at the very end of the comic that I always come back to, of him just in a moment when he feels betrayed, and Harvey like just left the whole. It's one of those long thin panels across the top, and Harvey left it just blank, and it's just him. It's just Crix like screaming, and then. Rebecca Nalty, the colorist, just made it just red, and it's such a perfect representation of just like this guy is pissed, and it's like so well told, but he also just like distraught, right? Like there's anger born from like all kinds of different things, and in this you can tell he's really hurt, and that's a really key part of who he is. So it's things like that, and then larger than that, it's just, I think Cav made mention of this at different points. It's that we've just taken so much from concept art that's been created along the way. A lot of it has been released, so people have seen it, and it's always funny because they're like, "Wait, who's this character? Oh, this lightsaber's a different color." Like, no, that's concept art, right? Like, I get it. Like, we all really want details about stuff, and we want it to be fixed, but a lot of that was created before we even started writing, or as we were getting started. So we would pull characters from those concept art pieces and be like, let's see who this person is, and then that would end up a character. And that's the great thing about writing Star Wars. It's an ongoing conversation between creator and artist, writer and artist. We're all creators, and just the levels to that has really been so enjoyable. And we get credit as the story architects. And like I said, we do have the micro and the macro kind of in the palm of our hands that we're working with. But like the artists in this case are very much writers too. And that's important to realize.
Absolutely. Yeah, they contribute as much to it in their own particular way. And I find that, there may be even situations where, the art ends up being something that can replace the prose in certain moments as well. Yep,
totally. And that's what I've been enjoying with Harvey, is like having an artist you trust means you can kind of go Marvel method on some pages and just be like, you know what? Have these giant creatures smash up against each other, and let me know, however many panels you need. Like, here's 2 pages, go to town. I'll meet you on the next page, and then we'll throw in some dialogue.
So you have mentioned dinosaurs in multiple interviews.
Well, let me say, multiple interviews have mentioned dinosaurs with me. I usually don't even bring up dinosaurs.
So it's become this virtuous circle, basically.
Right. Exactly. Well, I have a middle grade series called Dactyl Hill Squad that's dinosaurs during the Civil War, and specific kids riding dinosaurs. They're not actual people.
Right.
The dinosaurs aren't talking characters. It's like kids. They're basically beasts of burden in this society during the Civil War, and I was writing it during the early stages of the High Republic planning. So that's how it ended up on the board, because I kept jokingly bringing up dinosaurs, and someone else wrote it on the board. And but also, dewbacks, not for nothing, are one of the things that I loved as a child in Star Wars, and B, I think really well represent what's so great about Star Wars, which is that even this one like 2-frame beast that we see in a pan shot in the background, barely,
right,
it matters and deepens the world and has a backstory and has a name and everything else. And like that's what's so cool about Star Wars. So it's like the dinosaurs, but also like the world building aspect of dinosaurs being on a desert planet as beasts of burden of an invading force is amazing.
And so I have to ask,
yes,
does a dinosaur or something similar to it, or just monstrous in general, end up somewhere in the High Republic adventures?
Yes.
Oh, how wonderful. I'm very happy for you.
Thank you. Yes, life is good. I mean, throughout all my work, for sure. It's really like expect more monsters, because that's I did an interview the other night. Someone was asking me about top 3, I think, Star Wars movies, which is an impossible question and changes every week. But one thing I know is like I love Rogue One for its storytelling and for so many other aspects. But like it's not in my top 3 because I'd like more monsters in my Star Wars. You know what I mean? Which is personal. Like it's still one of the best Star Wars movies, no question. I think hands down, like beat for beat, script for script, it's one of the best ones. But like Return of the Jedi is my number 1 movie because of the Jabba's palace scene, period. Like alone, that's it. So Star Wars is very personal.
It is. I cannot watch the moment that Luke jumps off the little skiff and grabs the end of the plank and flips back up without like my the breath collapsing in my chest. Like
totally.
It's still the moment.
When I think about the
most.
last 10 minutes of the last Mandalorian episode, like I was standing on my feet with my mouth hanging open for like 10 minutes straight without moving from the minute the X-Wing showed up. And like I knew in my soul, like that was one of the greatest Star Wars moments of all time, period. Hands down. It was so good.
Oh, yeah, it was beautiful. Yeah.
All right, that's where we're going to leave things for now, and we'll pick up with the second half of the conversation on tomorrow's episode. It just remains for me to say thank you so much for joining me for this episode, as always. And may the Force be with you, wherever in the world you may be.
Star Wars 7x7 is not endorsed or sponsored yet by Lucasfilm Limited, Disney, or 20th Century Fox, and is intended for entertainment and information purposes only. Star Wars, the Star Wars logo, all names and pictures of Star Wars characters, vehicles, and any other Star Wars-related items are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of Lucasfilm Limited, or their respective trademark and copyright holders. May the Force be with them. All original content is copyright 2021 by Star Wars 7x7. We hope you love it.